What do you think, Martin? How do you know? Oh, for fuck's sake! How? Okay. Not yet. So what's the new link? Okay. All right.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and tumble on a sleepless bed, but you're wasting your time trying to lose the blues.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second attempt to record the third episode of
It's your time
you're wasting with me, David Didau, and
me, Martin Robinson.
Martin. You're very quiet. I hope you can be heard clearly at home. I don't know if there's a bit of gain you need to do there, but Martin, tell us what the good people at home have to look forward to this week.
Well, I've got an interview with Mr. Tom Sherrington, Mr. Rosenshine, and Mr.
Himself.
Walkthrough, Mr. Rosenshine and Walkthrough, and Mr. Curriculum Conversations, I think they're called.
Yes, the Archduke of Twitter.
The Archduke of Twitter, yes, indeed.
And he's going to be. There was a recent article in one of the education weeklies, with a bit of a kerfuffle with people sort of being discontented about Rosenshine's principles, and Tom's going to be issuing a little bit of a defence. Is that right?
Yeah, and he talks about it quite reasonably, and I don't think it's too much of a kerfuffle, really.
Good. It never is it really, when we get down to brass tacks? And then following that, I did an interview with possibly Twitter's most embattled head teacher, Sam Strickland, who's once again in the news at Dustin Academy for having rules and sticking to them. And he's going to be talking about his experiences with the local press and holding the line on school uniform. What next, Martin?
And then we're looking at the radio show. I think it was what's it called? Point of View with Michael Multurgo. Right. Yeah, and Thinking Otherwise it was called, and we're going to look at some of the things he said.
Right, okay. And then finally, we've got an interview with the authors of Symbiosis, the Curriculum in the Classroom, Kat Howard and Claire Hill. And they're going to be telling us about their new book. And if you subscribe to today's show, you can win yourself a copy of their book, published by show sponsors John Catt, who are going to make a couple of copies available. And we're also, right at the end of the show, right at the end of the show, Martin's hat is filled with all of you lovely subscribers' names, and he's going to be picking two winners to receive copies of Tom Bennett's marvellous book, Running the Room. I'm looking around for a copy. Can't see it. It's around. Here it is. Running the Room. Lots of empty chairs, and that'll be fantastic. But shall we go straight in to your interview, Martin?
I think so. That's a very good idea. Yes. So the wonderful Tom Sherrington is next up on It's Your Time You're Wasting. And Tom, have you been wasting anyone's time this week? Have you been doing? So the wonderful Tom Sherrington is next up on It's Your Time You're Wasting. And Tom, have you been wasting anyone's time this week? Have you been doing lots of work out there in the real world?
I've been wasting some people's time. Yeah, I've actually been to an actual school, which is up in Runcorn, and it was quite exciting to go on a train and talk to real people, and I really enjoyed that. And I've been wasting some people's time on Zoom, as we all have been. So yeah, we're sort of back into business a little bit.
And are you finding the online life as stimulating as going into schools, or different, or just not as good?
Oh, it's nowhere near as good. I'm amazed how much you can actually do, but it's not remotely the same. And I've done I did some big training things last week where every member of staff was at an exam desk in the hall, and it felt like I was about to sort of get them to start their exam, like as an invigilator. But you know,
let's hope they have a good algorithm to sort them out.
Well, exactly. But it was amazing. Actually, people are very, as long as you have a talk partner. So I've discovered talk partners is my new thing to use a phrase, because you have to say who when I say turn to somebody, who is it going to be and how far away are they? And as soon as somebody knows that they definitely have someone to talk to when you ask them to, everything goes swimmingly from there.
Well, it's good. It's good to see you, and it's good to see that you're still working well out there and doing things in the real world. I go back a long way. I think we first met in 2013 or 2014, and you took a great shine to my book Trivium, which I'm always very grateful for, and thank you for all your work and all your mentions of it over the years. What I'm interested in talking to you about today is Rosenshine. He's on everyone's lips, it seems, including the Times educational supplement, who ran an article raising some questions perhaps about the Rosenshinification. I can't even say that word. Rosenshinification of education. So it shows that your work is doing a lot of good out there, perhaps, but also raising some questions. Could you give me a short précis, perhaps, of some of the criticisms in there about Rosenshine?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think it's pretty good that the TS is actually taking interest in saying, you know, they've picked up on this sort of fairly extensive bandwagon effect of lots of people talking about something. So it's good that they wanted to sort of find out what it's all about, and also maybe prod at it and see if it stands up to scrutiny. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And some of the people in there's a couple of head teachers interviewed saying that we've got to make sure this doesn't become a be all and end all or some kind of robotic recipe. I would agree with that caution. I think it's important. And in fact, the writer referenced Rosenshine's own caution about his own work, which is it doesn't apply to every type of teaching. There are things where students have to be creative or originate more thinking, analysis, and so on, in maybe English literature, and some examples he gives. And so I think it's quite good that it drew attention to the fact that Rosenshine himself is saying, look, this has some boundaries around it. And then a researcher like Christian Bokov has come in and saying, look, you know, what does the underlying research behind Rosenshine say? And some of it's quite old. So lots of cautions, lots of caveats. And I guess that's really healthy, isn't it? One of the things I found really interesting, one of the things that I learned from the article was that Rosenshine had to squeeze his original 17 ideas into 10 because of the article. I didn't really realize that. So I didn't know that he had to sort of do this to fit the parameters of this American Educator publication. I thought maybe he'd have done that himself. But so look, with all of that said, I still feel like it comes up as a sort of pretty sensible set of ideas that a lot of people can use. So I guess having been subject to their investigation, I still think yeah, good. Well, despite all of that, I still think it's a really useful set of ideas. And I get that people have to be cautious about it. So in a way, I thought Rosenshine survived from the TES's spotlight.
So what do you think the limitations of Rosenshine are? And do you think that some schools may be using it a bit too mechanically?
I think the main thing is it's about the two limits. One of them is it's a repertoire of techniques which you use appropriately when you need them over time. It's not for any given lesson. And any school which is trying to turn us into you must start with this and end with that is not really thinking very hard about it, I would say. And also, it doesn't. I think it's important to keep saying it's the principles of instruction, not teaching, because an instructional teaching to me has a certain dynamic where you are trying to teach something very directly and get the students to understand what you're thinking and then embed that and practice it and so on. So there are other types of teaching where even something simple as reading a book, reading a book and thinking about what it means, and then that's not instructional teaching. Rosenshine doesn't talk about reading very much. So there's tons of things which don't apply. Behavior management techniques and relationships and all of those sorts of things. Well, anything where the students are kind of really the initiator, giving opinions. So Rosenshine is not a universal description. It doesn't even set out to be. So I think it's almost defines its own limits. But I still find it's very useful. The thing I find is great about it is that even with those limits, different subject teachers can be talking about questioning and modelling and scaffolding and guided practice to independent practice. I think these phrases are really, really useful, and nearly every subject has its form of them. So I think as long as we're clear that it doesn't apply to all things all the time, and it's how you do it that matters in your context, and we constantly think of it in that way, I think it's a useful way of framing the conversation so that everyone's talking about similar ideas.
Brilliant. That's good. That's good to hear, and very thoughtful as well. And I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in what you have to say. Particularly, I suppose, because I come from this background, it's particularly interesting to hear you talk about the limitations with perhaps creative work and where pupils need to make their own stuff. New knowledge, perhaps, I don't know, but that's really interesting. The other thing you are known about now, or known for, and it's all over social media with lots of those little interesting sort of drawings there, which you perhaps want to talk about, that is walkthroughs. Could you tell me a bit about those, please?
Well, this is a great collaboration with Oliver Caviglioli, where he's well known for illustrating nearly everybody's books. And he suggested we collaborated on a thing which he was interested in, which is step-by-step guides to common teaching practices to avoid this issue of lethal mutation and a misunderstanding, where people think they're talking about the same thing, but because it's not defined well enough, they end up sort of cross purposes and forgetting good ideas and distorting them. So we had we came up with this idea of if we could spell everything out in 5 steps, it would just be a neat frame for having these discussions about what we're trying to work on in our practice. Yeah, so it's a really fun project. So I started. Volume 1 came out, and in the summer when COVID happened, we decided to make this whole support package around it. So we made all these PowerPoint slides and videos, so that people could deliver training on their own without us having to go in using the books, but with all these slides, and that's been interesting. And now we're working on the 2nd volume, which I was doing some writing of today, and it's such an interesting thought process. How do I do this thing I do a lot or know how to do? Where would I start? What do I do next? What do I need to think about? And if you can break something down into 5 steps, you realize, gosh, do I really understand even what I mean by this idea? And it makes you think hard. And then obviously what happens then, Oliver picks that up on our shared document, and he'll try to illustrate that so it comes alive a bit and puts it into the frame of real people. So I love the whole process, and it's some of his drawings are kind of pretty wild. You just think, what the hell is he doing with this drawing? But it does make you stop and think. And sometimes they're just really sort of procedural. Like you can imagine a person doing this and doing that and doing that. But some of the more abstract ones I just think they're amazing. But they're not sort of literal. They're just sort of almost conceptual. And that adds interest to me. So I think the collaboration has been fun to do, and hopefully a lot of people are finding it useful.
That's it's good. It's good to hear about the difficulties of making. Hello, right, there we go. So
brilliant. That looks like a great interview. We've got some more of that, which we're going to play next week and also release it separately. But it was great to hear Tom talking very sensible things there about Rosenshine. One of the things I picked up, which I thought was interesting, Martin, he talks about maybe Rosenshine's principles not applying to behaviour management techniques. And interestingly, in Tom Bennett's book, he uses, in one part of the book, he uses Rosenshine principles to talk about how you can teach behaviour. So maybe it's even got applications beyond, what Mr. Sherrington realises.
Well, I mean, perhaps we should get them both on, and they can hammer that one out, can't they?
That would be a good one. I don't know if either of them are willing to come back, but there we are. I thought it was interesting him talking as well about how this wouldn't apply to some very obvious things, perhaps like reading, and lots of subjects or some subjects, and especially maybe primary teachers. There's lots of reading happening in the classroom, and it's important, I think, that they know. Okay, so the principles aren't really applicable here. Let's just read.
Yeah, I think it's the main thing is to take from that is it's not for everything, every lesson, every day. It's not the be all and end all. It doesn't solve everyone's problems. It's a thing. It's a thing which sort of shows a bit of very good practice and puts it in a way that is understandable, and it's been around for some time, and it's drawn from other things that people do. But certainly an arts teacher, for instance, might think, well, yeah, it has its application, but it's not the whole subject by any means. So when we're creating new knowledge, for instance, it doesn't quite come into it.
As always, common sense applies.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as well to hearing him talk a little bit about the creative process of working with Oliver Vaglioli, and who knew? Oliver comes up with some pretty wild drawings.
Yeah, perhaps they're the ones that aren't published. Perhaps he's got a little portfolio of wild drawings.
I think that's a book that's worth publishing. Oliver's band art.
Oliver in the Wild.
We should see if we can convince Oliver to come on the show and tell us a little bit more about that, perhaps.
Absolutely. So, are we moving on to uniforms?
We are. So, as always, this time of year, schools have uniforms, and we can discuss a little bit of the right and wrong about that. But schools have uniforms, and some schools obviously are a bit more strict than others about their standards and whether or not they enforce their uniforms. So it's almost become an annual tradition of the return to school, and some schools sending home students, and then the media getting hold of that and running with it. And so that's one of the things that I talked to Sam Strickland about. So hopefully we can now hear Sam's response to Sam Strickland about. So I'm fantastically pleased to welcome Sam Strickland to the studio. Sam, head of Duston School, and we've worked together. And Sam's written a brilliant book called Education Exposed, which, if you haven't read, you should look out for. It's a quick read. It's a nice thin book, which is always a pleasure. And lots of people have found it fantastically useful. But Sam, today we're going to talk to you a little bit about school uniform. And I know, and we've had the conversation before, that if you take a strict approach on school uniform and you really communicate your high expectations, it doesn't always go according to plan, does it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for having me today as well. Yeah, absolutely. You can have the most well put together, well thought out plan, communicate it to the nth degree, and someone somewhere won't like what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. I guess it's the Abraham Lincoln kind of syndrome. If you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. So every parent that will agree with you on an approach, there'll be someone that will disagree with you. And as a head, you have to reconcile that and accept it and be thick-skinned enough and oily-skinned enough to allow, the arrows as they come flying to kind of bounce off you, which is easier said than done, certainly in the early parts of your tenure as a head.
Right. Well, can I ask you a little bit about that? So I said you're the head teacher at Duston School, and you've been there, is it 3 or 4 years?
It's coming on for 4.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is scary in its own right.
Well, you've got away with it so far. So well done. And so coming up to 4 years ago when you started, can you explain a little bit about what some of your policies were, and particularly around uniform, and what happened?
Yeah, so if I kind of rewind back, the school historically had been one of the longest serving special measures schools in the country. It then went to outstanding, and then the advert came out for the headship. And then just before I was appointed, the school was downgraded to requires improvement. You then kind of fast forward to when I joined, and behaviour was off the wall. The uniform was okay, I guess, to be fair to the school, and there were big issues around the curriculum, and what you had was a staffing body that were quite broken actually through the experience that they'd had, and there was an exodus of staff as I was joining. About a third of the teaching staff were moving on to pastures new, so I had this kind of critical storm to kind of deal with. And I could go on and on and on about what it was like for hours on end, to be fair. But kind of going to your point, your question, I spent the first kind of 6 to 7 weeks trying to get to know as many people as I possibly could, meeting with all the staff individually, meeting with groups of pupils, talking to governors, of course, and talking to parents about the school to get a kind of a full sense and a full narrative of what was good, bad, and indifferent about the school. And from that, formulated what I felt needed to be done. Spent the next 7 weeks, which took us kind of in the build up to the new academic year in September, training the staff in what we wanted and how it was going to work. Brought in people like yourself as well, actually, to talk to the staff about misconceptions, which was absolutely brilliant, and reaffirmed a lot of what I was saying, which is really powerful, and then communicated all of that out to parents. But then the start of the academic year, and I think the 2 points I've probably suffered it the most would actually be right at that start and now with COVID. They're the points where the parents have really kind of, without being harsh, have gone at it the most at me and criticised things the most. And it's because it's change. People don't like change. Okay. And there's always a feeling of, the halcyon days of the past. It was always, much better under the old head. And I'm sure that'll be the case in the future if I move on and someone else takes over for the next incumbent, bless them. But yeah, you get that initial... You get a day or two of grace when you bring new things in and everyone's like you and watching, waiting, and no doubt the social media groups start firing off and people are talking to one another. And then you get the concerns and the complaint style emails that come in. And if you're lucky, that's all kind of in-house and it stays with you and you respond to them and deal with them. And if you're really unlucky, it then goes to the media itself. In terms of complaints that can be raised. Uniform wise, what we what we needed to do when I joined was, instead of having to change the uniform as such, it was actually to clamp down on it, to insist that it was being worn properly. So the policy
uniform you had and just enforcing it.
Yeah, the policy was really clear and really obvious. In terms of our pupils, they wear a shirt, they wear a tank top, they wear a blazer, a pair of trousers, or a skirt that's knee length, and a pair of shoes. But what I noticed in that first sort of 12 weeks in post is the definition of a knee length skirt went anywhere from one length to another. The definition of shoes, you would see pupils with the latest Nike Flyknit trainers popping in. They're black, sir, so they're all right, aren't they? You get every kind of bending of the rule that you can imagine. And for me, I think it's really important that you stick by what you say. If I want you to wear a white shirt, I want a white shirt. And the purpose behind it is the consistency factor. I don't think we need to make uniform ridiculously expensive for pupils. And I do think there is a purpose behind uniform, but actually it's meaning what you say and sticking to it. And it's about your standards and expectations, because if I'm prepared to allow you to wear whatever trainers you want, but I've said I want black shoes, then if I'm not going to enforce that particular policy line, then most of the other things I stand for are bendable, flexible, and I don't really mean what I say with anything that I'm doing. And then you can see holes being picked in everything within a school.
Yeah,
I suppose it's sweating school stuff.
Yeah, and I one of the sort of rationales that has always made sense to me is that, particularly when you're working with teenagers, their role in life, or at least some of them, is to probe the boundaries and find out what the limits of acceptability are. And they will find them eventually. Everyone has their limits. And if you make the limits about things like what colour shoes you're wearing, then you're not having to have the battle about whether it's okay to spit at a teacher or throw a chair at a peer. How do you feel about that as a rationale?
I think there's a degree of truth to that. I think if the kids can see that you sweat the small stuff, they'll and you are. It sounds extreme, but you're going to sanction them if you have to for small infringements, then the chances are they won't test the boundaries and the water to such an extent that they'll be spitting at teachers, they'll be swearing at teachers. But I think it goes back to that Doug Lemov principle of you permit what you promote. What is it you're about? What is it that you want? And how consistent, more importantly, are you about it? And most behaviour systems, within reason, of course, will succeed or fall apart based on the level of consistency shown amongst the staff, but also the consistency of the heads, right, and the drive of their head to see something through. It's the spirit of your convictions, really, isn't it?
Right. So let me ask you a slightly different question, and I think we've kind of touched on it already briefly, but again, every year when there are arguments about uniforms, that there's a certain section of the commentariat that will make the point, why do we even need uniforms? There's plenty of countries in the world where students don't wear school uniforms. There's no particular strong evidence anywhere that says uniforms, particularly strict uniforms, have an effect on the academic ability of students. Why should we even bother having a school uniform? What's the justification in your mind, Sam?
I mean, on one front, it's a very British thing, isn't it? And that's obviously an argument that's labelled against it. It's a very British-centric thing, and no one else does it. I think, if you're going to flip it, though, it's about that identity and belonging to being part of a particular community and a particular school and a particular establishment. And I use the terms, wear the uniform with pride a lot, wear this badge with pride, and no one is bigger than the establishment itself as well, including the staff. But it's on one front, it's about a sense of belonging, about a sense of collective, about a sense of community, and a sense of pride, which I've already mentioned. But equally, I would argue it's a social leveler as well. We get the arguments, don't we, about Scandinavia don't have uniform. And are they culturally, socio-economically comparable to the UK? I think we're going to have to do a massive study around that. But I imagine the demographic and the dynamic of that country to ours is quite different. And if you're serving a school, for sake of argument, that's got a real bandwidth of society, that you've got everything from Johnny that gets dropped off in the latest BMW hybrid worth 60,000 and dad's a lawyer, all the way down to somebody whose parents haven't got, you know, 2p to rub together. If we say wear what you like, which, you know, I hear the argument for it, the flip side is that you're going to have those pupils coming in, you know, Armani and Ted Baker and Nike and whatever else, all the latest designer clobber, and you're going to have those pupils that will end up not wearing any of those types of clothes. And we could debate whether that's right or wrong till the cows come home. But as a 12 or 13-year-old pupil or child, you are acutely aware that what you're wearing doesn't match up to your peers, and the chances are they're gonna poke fun at you. And even if they don't, there is a self-consciousness that goes with it as well. And I think, to my time in an all-girls school, which I taught in for nearly 5 years, the level of worry and concern over wearing your own clothes was extreme, and the anxiety that was attached
on non-uniform days.
On non-uniform days. But equally, I was ahead of sixth during my time in that school, and for the first 2 years, the uniform policy was smart business wear, which the bandwidth of understanding a smart business wear is insane. Yeah. And we turned it into a sixth form uniform, and actually the pupils themselves requested it to try and get rid of this constant worry in the morning of what do I wear and what length skirt and what top goes with what bottoms. Wow. I think it just eradicates all of that. You're not going to wake up in the morning and think, right, which top? It's the uniform. You wear the uniform. It simplifies things, I would argue.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So in your mind, just the uniform is a social leveler. It actually simplifies things, so you can think about more interesting things, and you've got that sense of unity and collegiality and sense of belonging to an institution, and those would all be interesting arguments. Obviously, they're not going to convince everyone, but that's certainly a good rationale. I definitely, I think that, and you'll be acutely aware of this as a head teacher, that, students are going to be often doing what they can. Well, when I was at school, the trick was that you just wore the thin bit of your tie and tucked in the fat bit behind. And that was, a marker of, in a school that I worked in, if you wanted to be considered to be, one of the cooler lads, you had the collars of your AirTechs up, so that everyone knew you were a bit of a radical. And children will want to do these things in order to sort of signify something about themselves. And how do you deal with those minor infringements? They're wearing the correct uniform, but they're not doing it. They know that they're breaking the spirit of it. What's your response to that?
I mean, my answer to that is, again, it's about consistency of the staff enforcing what it is that you want. So for sake of argument, you want top buttons done up. And I've worked in an establishment that has wanted that. And we could debate whether that's a sensible approach or not, but that was what that school wanted in terms of uniform. It's everybody singing off the same hymn sheet. And again, you are as strong as your weakest link. The first person that goes, man, it doesn't really matter, is when it starts to unpick itself. But it has to be led by their heads. Whatever you want in a school has to be driven by the head teacher. And if the head teacher doesn't drive it, doesn't make it part of the school's culture, the school.
So, what did you make of that, Martin?
Well, uniforms. He's got a great name, hasn't he, for a so-called strict head teacher?
Yeah, Stricko Master or something. Yeah, he has.
I'm sure no one's ever pointed that out before.
I doubt it. He's also a martial arts expert, Martin, so you want to watch yourself.
I definitely. Which martial art?
I don't know. But
the history of school uniforms. So I don't know if you got to address that at all, but
no, we didn't.
Starting Christ Hospital or something like that in the 1600s in this country here, and had some influence around the world due to probably empire and the English education system being the best and all that. I just wonder, perhaps, does uniform make that big a difference to education standards, perhaps? I mean, certainly countries that don't have it seem to do okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Sam talked about. We talked about together that there really isn't any evidence anywhere that uniforms make a difference to educational outcomes. But then, why would they? And I think that the argument in favour of uniforms isn't really, or shouldn't be, about academic standards. I think some people sort of make the argument that, possibly children are more likely to take things seriously and work harder if they're smartly dressed. But I don't really think that's defensible.
I don't know. Also, are they smartly dressed? Because some of these uniforms don't look quite as smart as others, should we say? And they're not necessarily decently tailored, are they? They're not sort of Savile Row standards, a lot of them.
Well, and you get into trouble, don't you? Because when schools do have those very smart uniforms, they tend to be more expensive, and then that brings its own problems.
Well, I'm just wondering about the heights of design, actually, sort of haute couture, perhaps, and things like that. Perhaps they're getting the cut right, absolutely smart. And even a smart blazer.
You're not advocating straw hats or tails as per
no. Quality cloth, I think, and cut beautifully. But is it such a thing? I mean, people say it's militaristic to put people in uniform.
And I think there's that argument, and I think one of the routes into school uniform comes from Prussia. Prussian school uniforms were very much modelled on the cadets' uniforms, and the Japanese took their model of school uniform from the Germans, and so that's why schoolboys in Japan are dressed in those sort of tightly buttoned shirts and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if they have epaulettes. I don't know where the schoolgirl uniform in Japan comes from. That's a bit dodgier, perhaps.
Yeah, I think looking at schoolgirl uniforms is one of the more difficult parts of this. I think as the teacher, you do get into this whole thing that you are trying to sort of tell girls all the time that their skirts too long, skirts too short, your makeup's on, makeup's off, your hair's too tied back or not tied back enough, and all this. It seems to be very much angled more at girls than it does at boys, perhaps.
Yeah, although I think boys often get told off for their footwear perhaps more than anything else. But you're right, and there is something I always felt quite uncomfortable as a male teacher, being with the expectation that I had to monitor girls' uniform. It was something that I shied away from unapologetically. It's not something I really felt comfortable about doing, and and it's such a there's some dodgy overtones to the whole thing. You remember the Britney Spears video, "Hit Me Baby One More Time," sort of being accused of sexualizing school uniform and that sort of thing. So it's a difficult area, especially for male teachers.
I go all the way back to St. Trinian's, I'm afraid.
Yes, I know you do.
Yes. that's my thoughts on that. The Chinese apparently have each student has up to 5 uniforms of different sorts for different occasions. Apparently,
right?
Apparently, this is
like
I'm afraid Wikipedia,
but more than that.
No, sort of a formal wear. More informal way, things like that. So on a certain day, they dress in a certain way for certain events, things like that. I suppose it would be like for the English, it would be perhaps St. George's Day or something like that.
Yes,
dress something slightly different.
Let's do more of that. We don't know we're born, do we? We're lucky that it's as low fuss as it is. Okay, so we're going to now, I think, talk about Michael Morpurgo.
Yeah.
Samantha, have you got the title, or are we going to do it without? Hey, there we are. Okay, so Martin, can you summarise Michael's point of view?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick summary, I suppose. So it was a programme, A Point of View, which you can access on BBC Sounds. Thinking Otherwise was the title Michael gave to it. So he's asking, we're back to school, but are we back to normal? And what is normal in education? Well, he says the overriding aim now in education is success in exams. And everything about school and a child's future is all tied up into what he calls a danse macabre. There's fierce competition and a narrow sifting operation, and too many left mired in disappointment. The recent report he points to is that our teenagers in this country are the most unhappy in Europe. And anxiety, uncertainty, and being cut off from their friends during lockdown can't have helped that in any way, taking away their normality. And no matter how much parents try to create a routine or do various things, trying to create lessons at home and home educating and all that, he thought that the off-qual algorithm that ended up at the end of all this sort of dealt them a horrible blow. So he wants to reform the whole system of what he calls exam tyranny and make more space for arts and sports. And instead of being dominated and dictated by exams, he wants children to be able to be more creative and thoughtful and all those things that lots of people would like in schools, perhaps, and say they would like more of. He says after World War II, there was a big rethink about health. There was the health service brought in. The UN was brought in sort of internationally. And also in this country, a new education system. And he says, surely that's the time now to think again. And he says the interesting two words here, it should take the child first. Testing is not educating, he says. We need space in the school day. And then interestingly, he says, yes, we do need exams and tests, but not data right the way through a school life. And he asks this question, are we educating or programming? And to use SATs to predict GCSE grades is wrong and unfair. And it's all of this is reinforcing the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And he wants to allow a bit of space for things that he's going to do. He's going to go back to his old primary school in London and share stories with the children there. They're writing stories, he's writing stories, and he says perhaps there's even space for a bit of dance.
Yes, and he promises that there'll definitely be laughter with that visit.
Yes.
Which, there weren't many laughs in the broadcast, I thought, because although basically there's not that much that I'd want to disagree with. There are a few points that I might take him up on, but essentially I don't think there's anybody really seriously arguing against the things that he wants. And for instance, let's take the point about SATs predicting GCSE grades. If you're doing that on an individual basis, if you're saying this child is likely to get, then yes, that's absolutely unfair and unrealistic and likely to be wrong. If you're doing it for huge cohorts for other reasons, then there's a then that has a reasonable degree of accuracy, but certainly not at the level of individuals.
I think but there are schools that do use it, target grades and things like that. So perhaps he's pointing out certain schools that he knows of that they're shaping his viewpoint on this.
And I think that that's a fair criticism. I think it's been sort of widely talked about. Ofsted, for instance, Sean Harford from Ofsted publicly criticised the idea of flight paths in schools, said it was nonsense. So if schools are doing those things, they should know that there's not much support from outside, and maybe they're doing them because they're in the habit of doing it and they're not really sure what else they should be doing. But these are reasonable points to make. One of the points where I took issue or slight issue with him, Martin, was he was saying that when it was the lockdown happened, and he makes this sort of ominous that suddenly out of the blue, children had been working really, really hard preparing for exams, and then one day the algorithm was announced, and it wasn't really like that. The cancellation of exams happened pretty immediately, and so, for instance, my daughter, who's in year 11, was absolutely cut adrift by her school. She didn't get any academic work at all for the entire duration. There was never any question that she might be doing any revising. But he makes the point that the government showed publicly that they didn't trust teachers' judgment. And I mean, this is an interesting one, because I think there are limits to the judgment that we should trust, and it's not that teachers' judgment when it comes to predicting children's exam success is flawed because they're teachers or because they're untrustworthy. It's that it's beyond the capability of human beings to make judgments of that sort. And so even this year, when teachers were working so hard to try and get the most accurate judgments, what teachers are doing is saying, quite reasonably and fairly, on the best day, in the best set of circumstances, what could this child achieve? And then that's informing their judgment. And obviously that's not what exams do, and it's a completely different set of ideas.
Yeah, I think he's trying to make the point when he says about data as slightly different, the having, like you're talking about flight paths and things like that, having data points all the way through. And I'm sure, and look, I think there are schools that have certainly done this, and I've certainly taught in schools that have done this sort of thing. And it's whether that is good. And his point on educating or programming, I think, is an interesting point to make. Are we just sort of taking kids through to their next target, their next goal, etc., etc.? And isn't it nice to sometimes go out and kick a ball about, be in the school play or something like that? Different aims, different goals, and just not necessarily data goals all the time. You know, can you get yourself a B? And you get yourself a 9 or whatever, you know?
Well, it's, I mean, obviously there are some things that we value that can't be easily measured, and arguably because they're hard to measure, they get squeezed out, or they're more prone to being squeezed out. And I know, Martin, you're a huge advocate for the arts, and Michael makes the point about sport as well. Sport always seems to me pretty well defended in schools for all sorts of reasons, but maybe the arts more precarious?
I think the arts, particularly performing arts at the moment, of course, as well as not just in school, but also in the nation. You know, it's difficult for the school play, it's difficult for the school orchestra, all these things which are becoming more and more under threat right throughout the world, of course. I mean, you know, professionally, let alone in schools, and you can't go and see stuff either, you know. So these are big things for the certainly the performing arts. Perhaps less so for the more singular, making a potter or something like that, a bit of pottery or whatever. But certainly the arts are under stress. I was interested in the other thing he was talking about, which I'm not so sure about, which is the report on teenagers being the most unhappy and things like that. I mean, are our teenagers the most unhappy? How do we judge that? We obviously ask teenagers all around Europe how unhappy they are on a scale of 1 to 5, but that's not moderated, is it? I mean, is a miserable teenager in England the same as a sort of someone in France, perhaps sort of the romantic sort of in their garret?
I think that's a really good point, Martin, because not only do we know that self-report is inherently unreliable, and that there's a pressure on respondents to answer as they think is most socially acceptable, and all sorts of other pressures. He was referring, I think, to the Good Childhood report released earlier in the year, which did say that, what does it say? It says 61.6% of teenagers in the UK are satisfied with their lot, with their life, and that's lower than in most countries. And moreover, 24% of girls and 14% of boys struggle with well-being, whatever that means. And I for one, struggle with well-being from time to time, as probably does everyone. And the only people who don't struggle for well-being always strike me as, you know, lunatics. But probably inadvisable to use that word. But one of the things that I did, and this is maybe a bit cheeky and a bit unfair, Martin, is I had a quick look at teenage suicide rates, and I found a site looking at figures from 2016, and the UK is significantly lower in that metric than many other European countries. So UK comes in at 109th, so, you know, nothing to be particularly proud of, but countries like Belgium, Sweden, the US, Iceland, France, Finland, Austria, Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Ireland, Canada, Netherlands, Denmark, all significantly higher in the UK on that metric, which, you know, obviously is a little bit more objective than what people say. And I think maybe we just like a bit of a moan in Britain. We like to complain and say we're unhappy with things. It's part, perhaps, of our character. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I wouldn't moan about it, but I don't know. That's Paul. Yeah, I mean, it's dreadful to hear about the
of course,
teenage suicides and all that. It's a horrendous thing to even think of contemplating that at a young age. But certainly being miserable. I used to be a punk rocker or something like that. You know, the Ramones are here. You know,
Like
I mean,
that.
it being miserable was an art form when I was younger. You know, perhaps it can be again. You know, just
Yeah,
turn all
well,
that teenage angst into extraordinarily bad music and art.
I don't know if emos are still a thing, but that was definitely trying to perfect the art of unhappiness, wasn't it?
Indeed.
Right. Well, we're not going to. Anyway, interesting. I think what we could probably sum up Michael's point of view as saying not entirely unreasonable. Lots of good points. Lots of things we'd agree with. Maybe a little bit emotive, but certainly, he's right to say we should never be. We haven't got things exactly right. We should be prepared to rethink what we're doing, and there's definitely improvements we can make. Is it fair?
I think so. And in the end, I'm not sure exactly what the piece was saying in terms of rethinking education.
Yeah.
It seemed to be doing a bit less data.
Which seems entirely reasonable to me. And so if you want to listen to Michael's point of view, it's only 6 minutes long, so you should definitely do that. And I've put a link in the description or in the live stream, so that should be there. And then we'll put a link in the description for those people who get this later as well. So, Martin, we also did a third interview this week. We worked very hard. And do you want to say a little bit about that?
It's Claire and Kat talking about the book Symbiosis, and they also talk about what symbiosis is about and why they've called it symbiosis, I think. And halfway through this interview, I seemed to disappear. I got stuck in some sort of interweb mess.
I think Kat had a similar problem, didn't she? But let's go to the interview and see what they say. Claire, hello. So thank you for being with us. So first question, obviously you're on because you've got a great new book out. How did you come to write that book together? Why the two of you?
So I first met Claire at a Team English National Conference, very briefly as well, and we started talking on the back of that. I was in the process of developing LitDrive, and wanted to branch out with regards to kind of our subject-specific CPD, and wanted Claire's expertise on that. So we kind of bounced around a few ideas. Claire became involved as our networks officer for LitDrive, and then our kind of friendship evolved from that, really. We were having several conversations around what curriculum development looked like in the schools, but how the how was as important as the what, and the idea for the book kind of really was just a holistic evolution of those conversations, really.
And I think that we had already found that when we had ideas, they were quite similar, and we thought very similarly. And that really cliche thing of we do tend to finish each other's sentences, or if you're on a WhatsApp message and they're going to each other and you end up saying exactly the same thing at the same time, it's borderline creepy at times. And it just meant that the book writing process was really easy, because although there were things that we would discuss and we would kind of debate around and decide which kind of direction we were going to go, actually there wasn't a single word, sentence, phrase in that book that hasn't been wrangled with and refined between both of us. And I think I don't think you can tell who says what at different points in the book anymore. There is a genuine sense of one voice.
Yeah, I don't think we know.
No.
Well, this brings us nicely to a discussion perhaps about the title, because we ought to get the title of your book in. It's Symbiosis.
Yeah, it's a bit messy now.
Why that title?
So I think one of the things that we were talking about a lot around curriculum was this idea of the relationship that a teacher has with the curriculum, and how sometimes curriculum can become this kind of separate entity, this idyllic thing. It's almost separate from what the teacher does. It's done by senior leaders or subject leaders, or it's from somewhere else. And actually, we'd done a lot of reading around this relationship that you need to have with what you're teaching, and how there is that symbiotic relationship between the classroom teacher and the curriculum itself. So there's that kind of layer to it, which we thought was really important. But actually the relationship between the different people involved in that curriculum work, so from the senior leader to subject leader to classroom teacher, there is a relationship that should be really tight. And so the idea is that kind of thread, that relationship weaves right the way through. And so we've got these dual metaphors happening just on the very front cover of the book of there's this, this symbiotic relationship, and then there's these threads that follow right the way through for everyone that's involved in that work. Because if you're not, I think one of the things that obviously Kat was really interested in was around wellbeing and teacher retention. Actually, that was the conversation that started this book in the first place. I don't know if Kat, you want to kind of talk about that a little bit and how that came to be.
So I wrote Stop Talking About Wellbeing, a pragmatic approach to teacher workload last year, and interviewed Christine Council because I was kind of toying with the original, the seeds of that idea that actually curriculum and wellbeing, teacher wellbeing or teacher purpose are really intrinsically linked. And I think that historically, in some cases, curriculum has been presented as the holy grail to teachers coming into the profession, when actually the relationship that they develop with curriculum and what they're teaching and feeling invested in that process is really important from the offset, not just for that sense of purpose of feeling fired up, into coming into work every day and being really excited about what you're going to teach as an expert, as of that specialism, but also from a whole profession point of view, retention really, because those people are going to feel invested at a classroom level, who are then going to be our curriculum designers, our subject leaders of the future. And it's that kind of that ongoing process, I think, that cyclical process of how we're developing those people to be really excited and fascinated by the curriculum from an early start point in their career, really, and how we can go about that.
Right. Okay. So the book's come at a pretty good time. So curriculum is quite a high profile subject at the moment. You don't make much, if any, mention of Ofsted in the book, but how much do you think that the conversations prompted in here are a result of that wider national debate and those external pressures?
I think if you go into anything where you're catering for Ofsted is almost a natural, nice side effect to teaching well and thinking about teaching well and thinking about what that should look like for your subject within schools. If you're doing that effectively, then the details that Ofsted are looking for is a natural consequence of that. And particularly with the new framework and the regard for knowledge that perhaps was absent previously, I think that's really pleasing to see, because it means that the conversations that we're having in schools around subjects and around curriculum are actually are far more aligned than perhaps they've ever been with that Ofsted framework. So I find that quite pleasing, really.
I do think that there is because this has become, curriculum is being reframed in a lot of schools. I know when I first started teaching, is that when we talked about curriculum, actually even up until just a couple of years ago, curriculum was what was on the timetable, how many periods you had in each subject, and actually curriculum wasn't always talked about in the same way that it is starting to be now. I think that one of the things that we were starting to see when we went into other schools, and we did CPD, and we have conversations with different people, is actually some of those ideas around curriculum, those really powerful ideas about sequencing and about retrieval and about really powerful knowledge, and some of the things that we would probably want to see in our schools, they were starting to be a bit mutated. So about a year ago at EdFest, which I think I saw you both at, I and Rebecca Foster talked about lethal mutations that were occurring in schools from the things that we could see. We talked about several different examples, and I think that the curriculum itself has a real risk of going down that route as well, is that you have a CPD session saying that you have to have retrieval practice at the beginning of every lesson, you have to build that into your curriculum, or you have to have knowledge organisers, or you have to have X, Y, Z. And actually then it becomes this is what you have to have. And there's not enough talk about why that's worth doing, and then how to get it right. And I think what we wanted to try to establish in the book is to really think about the why behind, the theoretical ideas around curriculum, and some of the research that we read around curriculum, and the why behind some of those ideas, and then move into the how, because many of the teachers that we spoke to could easily say, well, this is what we want in our curriculum, but we're less able to perhaps articulate how to put that into place and how to do so in a really effective way. So one of the things that we talk about a lot in the book is this idea of fragile knowledge, and how sometimes if we go for this very blunt instrument of 5-10 retrieval practice questions at the beginning of a lesson that perhaps are relatively random, actually that's not building a really strong framework for students to remember what they've been taught before, how it connects to what they're doing now, and how knowledge can be activated to do something really powerful with what they're going to do next, because perhaps conversations haven't been had in enough detail around the why and the how of why you would put some of those questions into your lessons. And we wanted to kind of look at those possible pitfalls and some of the issues that you might find around things like the genericism of curriculum, and the trying to implement things very quickly and try to find all these kind of little quick fixes, and actually how can we think about curriculum in a bit more depth and find time to do so. So for us, it was really important to say, well, we've got to think about opportunity cost in schools. We have finite time in schools, both in the lessons themselves and in the time that we have for teachers. So how can we perhaps make better use of that time? And I think most importantly, and I think this comes back to what you were asking about Ofsted, is that yes, lots of schools are saying curriculum is really important and we need to do this, that and the other about curriculum, but we can't say curriculum is king and then give teachers 1,000 other tasks to do. Something else has to give. And if we're going to prioritize,
a question here about, because I'm really interested in this, about, because something E.D. Hirsch was saying recently. I mean, he's after the idea of a national curriculum in America, if you like. How much do you think the curriculum should be decided at school level, at nation level, department level, or teacher level? I mean, it seems to be, if we're spending all our time in schools trying to design curricula, that the national curriculum is no longer really holding things together in any way, if it ever did, of course. So apart from exams, which perhaps focus a teacher's mind somewhat, how much freedom should schools have in the ideal curriculum? That would be the ideal curriculum design. Who should be in charge?
I think you have to find a balance there between the what and the how. The danger that you have of presenting a ready-made curriculum, and we see this in action, across, and unfortunately, I think sometimes it's a natural consequence of retention and retention issues, is that you have a packaged curriculum dropped into a school, and what happens along the way is that you have we are a graduate profession, and we have several individuals then that are specialists of their subject that don't necessarily feel invested in what they're teaching because they weren't part of that journey in order to reach that that package that's been put in front of them to teach. And so not only does it really disempower teachers, but it leaves them with that disconnection, I think, to the profession as a whole. So that you've got two elements at play there. The one is obviously the quality of the curriculum for students, and we have to get that right. We have a moral duty to do so, and as Claire said, there's a finite time. But then, you do run the risk then of finding simple solutions to a very complex problem. And I think that's the difficulty when we're talking about curricular development, because it is difficult. It is difficult to find that balance, and I think the sooner that we maybe own up to that as a profession, the easier our task would be. But to simply buy a packaged curriculum and drop it in, I think that's quite a contentious issue, not just for subjects, but for those that are serving the curriculum as well. Are we then, there's that implication, isn't there, that those people at a local level aren't qualified to do so. So it presents problems greater than the subject itself.
If you could take one message from the book in 30 seconds or so, sum up for each of you what you think is the thing that you think is most important and the thing that you're most impassioned about this idea of symbiotic relations between curricula and classrooms, what would it be?
Cat's waiting for me.
Claire, yeah, Claire, go.
It's a big summary, isn't it? I think it's really important to empower our subject leaders and our senior leaders and our teachers with the knowledge around the theory and the frameworks that can be used to create and to design and implement a really powerful curriculum. And what we try to lay out in the book are what we think are the things that we should know around curriculum, the ways we can approach curriculum, and actually offering a framework for developing our teachers, developing our subject leaders through that work to make sure that it has longevity and to make sure that we are offering our students the very best quality curriculum that we can.
Okay. Kat?
Yeah, I think that I very much started this journey thinking about retention and how to keep teachers invested and engaged with the profession. And I think curriculum is a monumental part of that. So I think the more that we encourage teachers to think about the curriculum that they're delivering and involve them in that process, the closer we are to, helping them remain in the profession as a whole. I really do.
Claire Hill, Kat Howard. The book's out right now, and you can order it from the John Cat website, or you can order it from Amazon, or any decent online bookseller will have it. Symbiosis, and I hope it's very, very successful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there we are. So we haven't even got a copy of the book. It's hot off the press. We got a PDF from John Cat to read before publication, but it's hot off the press. It's published. It's available now, and we are going. Well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself, Martin. We're going to draw
Well, there's the question. I think David has gone off the screen there and turned into a big question mark. We're going to indeed do something, I hope, about a draw. And this is the draw that we're going to have for teacher head, his name is, Mr. Tom Sherrington's book. And not Tom Sherrington's, Tom Bennett's book. That's it. Sorry. Tom Sherrington's book. Tom Bennett's book. We're going to do a draw. I think that David, you're back. You turned into.
I'm so sorry. That was my fault. I just did something.
In your excitement.
I know. I'm so excited.
You turned into a big question mark, which suddenly threw me as you were in mid-flow. But yes, Symbiosis is a prize draw next week, and a prize draw this week is
Running the Room.
Running the Room, Tom Bennett's book. There's too many Toms. It's your Tom you're wasting, and all those sorts of jokes have been done many times. Do you want to give me some help with this, Dave?
Yeah. So you hold it up and pass me. If you draw one out, pass it to me, and I'll. Here we go.
How are you going to read this out?
There we are. I'll pass it. I'll pass it back to you.
It was meant to be the other way around.
Anyway, sorry, got confused. Well,
so
who
we
is
have
it?
First side of the hat. We have Phil Ashley. Phil Ashley, there he is. I
Hello,
take it
Phil.
it's a he.
Well
It might be he, of course. And might be. And there's two, is there? Is there two?
Two.
Yeah. So, and the second one, I'm sorry, I don't know, is Uneasy Werewolf.
Uneasy Werewolf. Well, Phil Ashley and Uneasy Werewolf, we don't actually have any means of getting the book to you. So if you want to claim your free copy of Running the Room by Tom Bennett, published by John Cat, kindly provided, free copy provided by John Cat, you'll have to get in touch. And the email is above our head. So if you email us, I'm sorry for all you Brexiteers, it's a .eu email address. You'll just have to get over yourself if you are. But let us know who you are and give us your address, and we will pass that information to John Cat, who will send you the book. And the same. We're going to do the same thing. There's probably a bit easier way to work this out, but we don't know what it is. So if you want to help us, tell us an easier way. In time, if you are a subscriber to the show, so you have to press subscribe. If you subscribe to the show, you will be eligible to be put in the draw next week to win a copy of Symbiosis, the Classroom and the Curriculum. No, the Curriculum and the Classroom. And Martin will, with his, it's a nice hat, Martin. Is that one of your?
It's a lovely hat.
One of your festive props.
It's a pork pie. Pie.
Very nice. Do you wear that like for a bet? Very nice, very nice. Well, it just remains to say thank you for wasting more of your time with us this week, and we hope that you will join us again next week for
It's your time you're wasting.
Goodbye. Have a great weekend.
You can cry and cry until your eyes are red. You can toss and